Hello to everyone. Welcome to a new session and part 2 of Transformation by our in-depth study, the wisdom pattern of order, disorder, and reorder. This is your Pastor Yadi. All I see Jesus talking about is being light, being yeast, being salt, and being mustard seed. This is rather prominent both at the beginning of his inaugural address, Matthew 5:13-16, and in his parabolic discourse in Luke 13:18-21. It's hard to believe that we missed it in the favor of visions of Christendom, moral majorities, managerial instructions, electorates, and your excellencies. It keeps us in the imperial ego mind as opposed to the surrendered, trusting mind of Jesus. It seems that in earthly terms, all Jesus ever intended was a yeast of truth that would be a change agent or leavener in history. Ironically, Jesus and his disciples looked much more like an immoral minority than any moral majority. His plan was truly subversive and is the only one that ever has changed of true victory. The gospel is beyond this whole mindset. The storyline haunts us all and still disappoints pretenders to power on left or right. The Jesus story stands as a revelatory judgment on every other storyline, trial, and legal system in the world. It is still a shock and even a disappointment, and Jesus has a lot of hope in sinners, which is good news for just about everybody. Jesus only has problems with those who don't think they are sinners. This turns all religious history upside down. The search for the so-called purity is over. Now, the only issue is honesty and humility. We call it by the hard word, repentance. In any human scenario, even when we don't want to believe it, we know that there are at least and always three characters: Jesus, the bad guys, and the supposed good guys. What Jesus says is, be prepared to be surprised about who is who. This leaven of the gospel is inexorably chipping away at such things as capital punishment, wars against the poor, war rationals in general, legal systems, idealizations of the wealthy and those at the top, and traditions of human torture and oppression. The gospel storylines will have the final chapter of history. God is winning, and that is good news for all the people, especially for those who don't yet know they are also under the mercy. Again and again, it creates an ability for humanity to pull down the mighty from their thrones and lift up the lowly. It is no accident that these revolutionary words come from Mary, the feminine first believer in Jesus. It seems that all great things in history starts with an individual person for the sake of the alliteration and memory. I will say, man. If that person has something to say that is alive and real and names reality well, it often moves to the second stage of becoming a movement. That's the period of the greatest energy. The church, for example, is at its greatest vitality as the God movement, and the institution is merely the vehicle for that movement. Neither Pope nor President can ever control the movement itself through any theology, doctrine, or dogma. We cannot control the blowing of the Spirit. It is to the mature credit of the Church that it was able to teach this officially at the time when the Second Vatican Council. The movement stage is always very exciting, creative, and also risky. It's risky because the movement of God in history is larger than any denomination, any culture, or any tradition's ability to verbalize it. We feel out of control here. And yet, why would anybody want it to be anything less than that? Do we really want to think that the great God could be in our little pockets? Would we respect a God that we could control? Would we really respect a church that presumes it could predict and contain God's actions? I don't think so. Yeah, that is what so much immature religion seems to want. Control over God by worshiping God correctly. Thus, we move rather quickly out and beyond the dangerous movement stage to the machine stage. This is predictable and understandable, even if also unfortunate. The institutional or machine stage of a movement will necessarily be a less alive manifestation, which is not bad, although always surprising for those who sees church as an end in itself instead of merely a vehicle for the vision. We need the less noble parts of the body to keep us all growing toward love. 1 Corinthians 12:22-24. We can also learn from the less mature stages of life. The steps to maturity, in fact, are always steps through immaturity. There is no other way, but when we do not realize the limited capacities of a machine, we try to make it into something more than it is. We make it a monument, a closed system operating inside of its own, often self-surviving logic. It's the nature of the beast and a seemingly inevitable movement, especially as we get tied up with job securities, consistent policies for everything, and public images and identity. As soon as we get employment norms and professional people whose jobs depends on status, security, and dependability, it's very hard to take risks for God or for gospel values. Eventually, this monument and its maintenance, of course, and self-preservation becomes ends in themselves. Jeremiah rails against such a formalization at the beginning of his prophecy. Put no trust in delusive words like the temple, the temple, the temple, while you follow alien gods. I am not blind. It is Yahweh who speaks. See Jeremiah 7, 4-11. Monuments need to be regularly deconstructed and rebuilt. Truth is never actualized until it becomes my truth. Suffered, owned, and internalized. Surely authentic religion can settle for nothing less. Let me use here a clarifying and dense quote from John Stuart Mill, 1806-1873. He is warning us against the monument and machine stages. Even if the received opinion be not only true, but the whole truth, unless it is suffered to be, and actually is, vigorously and earnestly contested, it will, by most of those who receive it, be held in the manner of a prejudice or prejudice, with little comprehension or feeling of its rational grounds. Each generation has to appropriate its deepest beliefs for itself. Each generation must itself be realigned with God and discover the mystery for itself. Yet we want the results of someone else's homework. A machine become monument is now in place. It is so easy to just step on board without even knowing why or feeling the longing ourselves. We have entirely jumped over the man and movement stage and have God's frozen people instead of any hint of chosen, beloved, or journey status. In this state, religion is merely an excuse to remain unconscious, a memory of something that must once have been a great adventure. Now religion is no longer life itself, but actually a substitute for life, or worse, an avoidance of life. But God has no grandchildren, only children. The secret is to know how to keep in touch with the man and movement stages, without being naive about the necessity of some machine and the inavailability of those who love monuments. We must also be honest. All of us love monuments when they are monuments to our man, our movement, or our machine. Sometimes machine and monuments folks can be recaptured by the vision of the man and the movement. What if we each went home tonight, gathered to kids in a circle and said, we are getting rid of the TV? That would be very hard to do without a larger support system. Those kinds of wings to a larger world seldom can be grown inside of the nuclear family. All we can do is give the foundation of love and security so that they can ask such daring questions later. Those questions usually cannot come from home. In fact, family holds many people behind a very safe and often small white picket fence. It is not even roots for many people, much less wings, only a restricting brick wall. That's why Jesus insists on asking bigger questions than the immediate family usually can. Jesus tells us not to get too secure in our job or assume that our small family has all the answers. This seems to be an Eastern wisdom that is more common in Asiatic cultures. The small family is very tight, but also tightly ensconced inside of extended family. Neighborhood, religion, and traditions. Sadly, we have neither. In India, for example, the 4 stages of a full life are student, householder, forest dweller, seeker, and finally wise elder. People cannot get into the 3rd and last stages of life until they have left the 2nd. In the practical West, we stop at stage 2 and increasingly do not have the skills for living even that stage well. I am sure this is a part of the explanation for why our wisdom is so small, as are our insular politics and our tribal view of so much of the church. Most of our men have not made many journeys away from Mama and material churches and companies, because men have not undergone their spiritual journey. Many spend the rest of their lives trying to marry Mama, as many wives, afraid of any real intimacy with women, or needing the security system that Mama always provides. When the safe assumptions of society and family reach the monumental stage, you might think you need TNT or major surgery to break through. But you never win with any frontal attack and the mystery of evil. If you attack something directly, you let it determine the energy, the style, the opposition. You soon become the same thing, but in a better disguised and denied form. Jesus calls that trying to drive out the devil by the prince of the devils. See Luke 11:14-22. That's how evil expands so successfully. The disguise is almost perfect, and without spiritual discernment will fool the best of us. So instead, Francis of Assisi went out to the edge and did it better. Francis respected the monuments, even loved them, but also went back to the original dynamics and non-violent style of Jesus, the man for his inspiration. Assisi is surrounded by city walls. Inside those walls are the cathedral and the established churches, all of which are fine. That's where Francis first heard the gospel and fell in love with Jesus. But then he quietly went out the walls and rebuilt some old ruins called San Damiano and the Portiuncula. He wasn't with his mouth telling the others they were doing it wrong. He just gently, lovingly tried to do it better. I think that's true reconstruction. Remember, the best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. That might be a perfect motto for all reconstructive work. It does not destroy machines or even monuments, but invigorates them with new energy and form. San Damiano was still a church building, but it was small, poor, and on the edge. Francis transformed it. There is a book called The Ignorant Perfection of Ordinary People. The brilliant title says it all. In it, Robert Inchausti speaks of the spiritual longings of ordinary people as the basis for most great social and political reform. Robert Inchausti. He calls it, so rightly, constructive postmodernism. Excuse me. This is exactly what we are talking about here. People who know the challenges, but build anyway. This is not naive denial, not Pollyanna idealism, not utopianism, but the true biblical hope that is received only on the other side of suffering and failure. Most of us either become paralyzed or think we are enlightened because we know about the problems, the sin, the scandal, the essentially tragic nature of human existence. We go through the constructive stage without the reconstructive gift of vision and hope. That's probably the main burden of being a non-believer or a mere ideologue, the forlorn or cynical attitude of so many academics and social activists. The pattern through which each generation must maneuver are the same as our ancestors, and someone who has once touched the face and name of sin in themselves is never shocked again. Evil, like God, is one, which is probably why we personified it in Satan. But once we smell the scent of Satan, it shows up in all kinds of shapes and forms, none of which surprises us anymore. They only sharpen us. What has made this sharpening difficult is that all the information, not wisdom, since the beginning of time has become exponentially available in the last generation. We are always expecting the final and truthful answers to show itself. This explosion of data makes us think that wisdom is still out in front of us. Unfortunately, we turn away from the pregnant now, from our ancestors, and from the healing power of memory. We reject healthy traditionalism, even transformative traditionalism, in favor of a future answer that is never quite here. Because almost as soon as it arrives, it is rejected as an old idea when another guru appears on the scene. Just watch the flow of self-help books and how quickly their fleeting fame passes. By very traditional wisdom or moral realism, I refer to qualities or states of being such as silence, solitude, detachment, honesty, confession, forgiveness, and radical humility. No new author or book is going to do better than these. We hope any new material will just help us understand them better. There is also nothing very spectacular about any of these disciplines. No dependence on crystals, prophecies, auspicious days, or a highly trained priestly class. Ordinary people discover this wisdom by living. Probably the single most traditional wisdom issue is, of course, the immense teaching capacity of human suffering, and especially unjust suffering. Probably none of the world's religions deal with it in a more upfront and utterly dramatic way than Christianity. We are, after all, the only religion that worships the victim. As discussed earlier, we proclaim the scapegoated one to represent all we deny and reject. It seems that God must be trying to address a very central human problem in coming among us as a crucified and forgiving victim. I ask again, isn't this, sooner or later, at the heart of everybody's spiritual problem, what we do with our pain? Why evil? Why suffering? Even Job can't get an answer. And Job, I think, is the epitome of moral development in the Hebrew scriptures. He is the same story as Jesus. Job begs for the answer and finally truths when he knows that God is taking him seriously and he is simply in the conversation. See Job 42, 1-6. Jesus later becomes the answer in his passion, death, and resurrection. But it is really the same answer. God can be trusted. The world is still safe, coherent, and even blessed. We are saved by being addressed and included in a cosmic conversation. We do not really need answers. We only need to be taken seriously as part of the dialogue. But we only know this in hindsight, after the suffering and the struggle. It cannot be known theoretically, theologically, or before the fact. I cannot copy from someone else's homework. I can only be inspired by it, which is a good start. Our knowledge of God is participatory. God refuses to be intellectually thought and is only known in the passion and pain of it all. When the issues become soul-sized and worthy of us, Saint Catherine of Genoa 1447-1510, a lay woman and mystic is supposed to have asked Jesus in one of her locutions why there is so much pain and suffering on the earth. And Jesus responded that if there was any other way, he would have thought of it. There's no other way we learn how to let go and discover compassion. It seems there is no other way that we will give up control until we are led to the limits of our own resources and must rely upon another. Then we know the ground of our being. Don't trust any spiritual teacher who has not suffered, and don't look for any teacher who predicts the future. Only one who can lead you to peace with the past and especially with the sufferings of the past. This is the reality of life. May you find peace within. Have a blessed weekend. This is your Pastor Yeti. Bye-bye.